Recording. So I'm going to just create a simple CRUD app called landmarks that's going to take in a landmark, and then we also want to show the location on that landmark in a Google map. So we're just going to create a simple CRUD app. All the stuff for project, landmarks, ls, where's landmarks at? Right there, clear. But I'm going to cd into landmarks. I'm going to open up landmarks in my current VS Code. Right there. I'm going to create a virtual environment. Let this virtual environment come up. I'm going to pip. I'm going to activate my virtual environment VNV and activate. There's my virtual environment. It came up. Now what do I have to do? Pip install Django.
Actually create your app. Isn't that the first thing?
No, we want to first install Django. So I'm pip installing the upgrade. Pip, I'm going to clear. And now, because in order to create an app,
you have to have a manage.py.
Yep, manage.py, start app, going to just call map. There's our map app. So what's next? What's generally, okay, we're going to add the map to our installed apps. Put it anywhere, but I like putting it on the bottom. Map. All right. Now we're going to create some models. It's going to be a relatively easy, pretty straightforward model. It's going to take in the landmark class. It's going to take in a name and an address. And that's it. What's next after we create our models?
Migrate. Make migrations.
Correct. We're going to make migrations. So let's do Python manage.py, make migrations, map. I'm calling maps. So created this model landmark, map migration 001 underscore initial py. We go under migrations. There's our initial make migrations. So what does this file do?
What does it do? It uses Django to coordinate with SQL or SQLite to build a database.
Yeah, it's essentially just, it writes a Python file that when ran turns this into SQL code. It will literally turn it into like what creates. What is it? Create the, not just create DB, but like how to create models. What is it? It literally just turns into SQL code and then inputs it into our database. But it's not in our database yet. What do we have to do? Migrate? Yeah, we're just using SQLite. We're not actually creating a full-fledged Postgres database. We're just using the SQLite database. That's already in Django. But you could change it if you want, but for intensive purposes and for the sake of time. Migrate. So I've applied all these migrations. There's our map model, or what is it? landmarks model, and then all this stuff is already built in to Django. We have OAuth, content types, admin. That's all the admin stuff. So now it's generally the next step. You kind of said it before. Yeah, let's set up our URLs. Do you want to do it in our app? The app or
The project.
project URLs? Thank you.
That way you can add and include each of your file you create in your app.
Perfect. So we should copy paste this. So path we imported include, and so we have our admin. That was already there. So let's look at what actually changed. We literally just added include, and then this path landmarks include the map or app URLs. Let's see what happens. Any questions? What questions do you have? Pretty good so far? So now what? What's the next step? Here.
You go create URLs in your app.
Thanks, Amir.
Sorry.
All right, yep, you are correct. Create our URLs in our app. Our URLs file we have to create. So Django, where is it from? Django.urls, import path from import views, because we're going to have to use our views. Now I'm just going to copy and paste our URLs here. What's next? So URLs, this is actually, goes to, what is it, landmarks? Backslash. So right here we're in landmarks, backslash, and then nothing. After that, then we have to create a views landmark list. I'm just going to copy, paste the code. So what's going on here? Import models from the landmark, taking the request. We're grabbing all of the landmarks in our database. Currently, there aren't any. And then we're rendering a map landmark list HTML, and we're passing in all the landmarks. Questions up to this point? What's generally the next step? Templates. Amir, where do the templates go? What part of the app or project, where do the templates go?
Would go inside of your landmarks. So you just make dir templates and then touch a HTML file in there.
In our landmarks or our app? In the the project or the map or the app?
I believe it's the project.
So
If you're going to use your Jinja templates, then
we're just going to do it in the app. I know that was last week we did it in.
That was because it was a project level type file, so we were dealing with the admin.
Yeah, for authentication, you put it at the project level.
Okay. So we're not doing authentication right now. We're just doing.
oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, just at the app level. I was thinking like authentication for the whole project.
Okay. No, that makes sense. You're absolutely right. So templates and then map. And within our map app, we want to do landmark list.html. Then in here, I'm going to copy and paste. This is where our Jinja goes, right? So Jinja. So I just copy and paste this. So Jinja, what's that? Django? Yeah. It just enables us to So right here goes the expression. So anything within like that, it's like is it the expression or the statement? Can't remember. And then the doubles, if you want to interpolate, yeah, Python variables. So in here for landmark, all landmarks, we're rendering this div with an H2, with an href, with a link that currently doesn't go anywhere, and we're rendering the name and the address. And we're doing this N4. Any questions? Why don't we just hard code like landmarks?
Because part of the URL can change.
So
And so when you reference it's references at the file level, it's not like through the Django, it's scalable with any of the URLs changing.
right. Perfect, yeah. So if I were to hard code this in here, that means if I were to ever change this URL, I'd have to go through my entire program, my entire application, and look for where \landmarks is and change it. But if we do it this way, it's going to reference our URLs, landmark list. Oh, where'd it go? The URL landmark list, and it's going to use this, like this whole URL.
Tom, can I ask a quick question about Juliett?
Yes.
It's not like something we need to import or anything. That's just what you call Python syntax when using HTML. Like what's written there, that's called Juliett.
Yes. This is, yeah. Okay. So.
Why do we differentiate that between just calling it HTML? Because it's just syntax, right?
But because it's not actually HTML. Okay. So it's only used pretty much for Python. And I think it's, actually I don't know, I think it might be already pre-installed.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the semantics of it, but basically I don't need to install anything. If I use that syntax, Python will run it.
When you install Django.
When I install Django.
Yeah, so here you usually have to install Django.
Okay.
So I think Python or Django already has it installed, so you don't have to actually install it. And this is, all right. So right now we're rendering all the landmarks, but we don't have any data yet within our Python, or in our database. How do we do that within the shell? What's the command to get us in the shell? Just right here.
Faker?
Faker? No.
Do you want to run the IPy function? Something
Just like the normal. Is there a normal one? Python shell?
There
we go. So in here, can I just do like map.models, import? So let's create. So I'm creating an object. So I'm just literally creating landmarks to see if this works. All right. So we've got a name, Eiffel Tower, and the address is just. If I wanted to get all of the landmarks, landmark objects, all being located at whatever, Eiffel Tower, great. So we've got 3 things in our database. So let's start our server. Herlin, how do I start the server? What's the command to start the Python server? No. Mike.
I'm just looking at my,
Oh, sorry.
I was saying 1 moment. I'm looking at my notes.
I believe it's Python manage.py run server.
Server. All right. Let's go to that page. There we go. Cool. Landmarks, the beam, Eiffel Tower. See, it's not going anywhere yet. Which is fine because we haven't created the individual detail of the landmark. So let's add the detail. What's next? Undo path. And how does it, what's this? And landmark ID. We're going to go do views, landmark detail, and then name equals landmark detail. So next, we got to create a view for it. Copy and paste. We got landmark detail. We need to also import get 404. So it's taking in a request, the landmark ID, and it's getting the object by the primary key, which is the landmark ID. And then it's rendering this template landmark.details, and it's passing in the landmark, which is the single landmark ID. What's next?
Create your landmark detail.html.
Create our landmark detail template. Landmark detail.html. Great. So it's just the landmark name and the landmark address. Now I'm done with that. Now now I have to actually go back to landmark list, and I can do like, what was it, landmark, I can interpolate landmark ID, or I can use the URL. So URL, landmark, the detail, but I also have to pass in ID. I can do landmark.id. And have you guys seen it before where it's also like landmark ID equals?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you only have one variable, you don't really need the equals, but there can be instances where you have to pass in multiple variables. At that point, you actually have to put like landmark ID equals, and then maybe something else if there's more data in here, like something, yeah, user ID equals user.id. But since we don't need it, because we're only passing in one variable, Django already knows that just landmark ID is the variable.
You put one space after landmark ID.
Yes, thank
Not
you.
strictly necessary,
But for best practices and just for visual everything, it makes it look a lot better. Let's see if this works now. I go back, I'm gonna refresh. If it doesn't break, what happened?
It says
Oh, first match.
there's no pattern found.
I'll need it.
There's issue on the URL.
Is there, hold on, let me see, landmark. ID equals. Is that it? No. Oh, is there a issue? Where is it?
That is the URL page, the extension says landmarks.
Let's see. So reverse landmark detail with keyword arguments. Landmark D not found.
You need a slash after it inside the code.
Right in here. So
No, you need no space.
is that it? I think that might be it. Yes, thank you. So the issue was I had a space here after the int. It's just bad habit of me, just putting a space. There is no space. We're back up and running. Let's see if I click on it. Goes to the bean. Click on 2, landmarks, 2, Eiffel Tower. Oh, this is apps coming together. Okay. So now that's all fine and dandy. Our app kind of sucks, actually. But we want to add some sexiness. We want to add a map right here that shows the location of the Golden Gate Bridge and the bean and everything like that. So I'm going to click on this link. It's a Google Maps API. Let's get started. What do we want to use? We want to use our... So when it comes to documentation about APIs, you have to read the documentation. Google just by itself does a tremendous job at documentation. You can literally just follow step by step, and if you just follow it, you'll be able to get it to work. Other APIs, other people, other organizations that have APIs don't necessarily have that great of documentation, so it's a lot of trial and error and just trying to make things work. But it's all about documentation. And Google Maps offers a plethora of APIs, for the most part, pretty free of charge. I don't know why they charge it or why they don't charge us. Probably because they make so much money in advertising that they're like, hey, this is yeah. And they just have so much money that they're like, hey, this is just good for the world. Or when they initially had the motto, "Don't be evil," they're like, oh, we're just gonna give the world a better place now because we have this. But so they offer this, give this Google Maps for free, this API. So we want to use the Maps Embed API. And this is all in the curriculum. So I just clicked on this link in the curriculum. Where'd it go? It's not coming over. Maps documentation. And quick start, what do I want to do? I want to highlight a place or an address. I can show the results of a search. I can show driving directions, show street view, just show a map of an area. If I look down here, looks like, oh, that's all I really need. So let's click 125 to South Clark Street. Awesome. So it looks like this is all I really need to do, put into my HTML for this to show up.
Is that how you generate the other information?
So let's go back. I'm just going to throw this in our details. So this is where we want to put it. So it looks like takes in an iframe. It's got a width, a height, a frame border style. I think this is all just kind of, I don't know if that's 100% necessary. And then it has a source, which is literally just a link. We got maps, embed, V1, view, zoom, 17, center. Looks like this might be latitude and longitude. And then it looks like we have this key and key, but it looks like we're missing key. So I'm just going to put this here just for reference. And let's follow. Just get an API key, because it seems like that's what we need to do. Get an API key. So an API, who knows what an API key is?
That's how they restrict access to it.
Okay. So an API key, essentially, the Google needs to know who is making these requests. So an API key enables Google to know that, hey, it's Tom. Tom is making this request. Tom's app is making this request. And there's a thing called public and private API keys. So with Google API, since this is kind of free and public, they only need one API key, which is a public API key, which is we're going to get here, and it's going to be in our app or for the entire world to see. And if they really wanted to, someone can come and take that API key and use it on their own website. But it really doesn't matter because it's free, it's open, there's really nothing preventing, there's no like damage. There would be like nothing bad. But for like private API keys like Twitter or Stripe, you need to have like a public API key and then a private API key. And the private API key is like secret and something that should be hidden because it associates you with some pretty sensitive information. Like if I had like if I use Twitter's API, I'd have a private API key that's only associated with Tom Preet and Tom's user that would enable me to log in with my own user account and make posts and do all that stuff. But for Google, this part is all public APIs. We don't need to worry about any private APIs. So get an API. To use the maps embedded, you must have an API key. The API key is a unique identifier that is used to authenticate requests associated with your project for usage and billing purposes. It's free. You don't have to pay anything right now. Any questions?
Well, I would assume that like if you were doing your own version of Google Maps and had millions of users, then they'd start charging you for using it.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure they'd probably make their money in some other way, but yeah, they might. There actually might be a usage limit. Maybe it's like 4,000 requests per day or something like that, but it's nothing substantial. Or we're not going to be making that many
Yeah,
requests.
nothing substantial for the scale that we're doing.
Yeah. So to get an API key, we're going to visit Google Cloud Platform Console. I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to make sure I'm on my other Google. So this is my user. I need to, where is it? Is it Google Maps Embed API? These are all these different APIs. We have a software developer kit for Android, distance matrix API, Street View, but we want Google or the Maps Embed API. I'm gonna open that up in another tab.
How are we supposed to know which one?
You gotta research it.
So that's the documentation level.
Yeah.
RTFM.
So API enabled. So I want to, first you're gonna have to create a new project up here. I already have one that's already like active, so I need to create a new project. It's up here. Let's go back. This is my landmark lecture API, but you're gonna need to create your own project by yourself. India landmark project. Organization code, create. Creating a project. Oh, did I say India? Why did I say India? I'll change that.
It's fine. You name the project.
I'm going to change that. Oh, well. I'll change it later. So the first thing we're going to have to do, lecture, go back to India one. I need to enable embedded API. Let's see if this even works. So I'm enabling this Maps Embed API. So APIs, I don't even know if I have any, like what's my API? So I enabled the Google Maps Embed API. I'm going down to APIs. Do I even have one yet? Let's look at the Google console. Click the drop down, select create a project if you want an API. So it looks like click menu button and select APIs and services.
Maybe but far left.
Far left. Here. APIs and services. Just say click credentials. All right. APIs and services, credentials. Create credentials. You need create credentials. So I need to create a credential API key. And here's my API key. I copy it. Then I'm going to close it. So there it is. There's my API key. Yeah, let's paste that into. I'm going to just paste it into there. I'm just going to copy this, which I already have. I'm going to paste it in here and just want to see what shows up.
It's not going to leave the comment on the bottom.
This part,
Yeah.
even if it's commented out.
Oh, you gotta do it in Jinja, yeah.
Well, I'll just do it. So there's my iframe. I've got latitude to longitude. I might want to use something else that we already have access to in our database, which is the address. So we might want to look at a different format. Now we've got our API key. Now, where is landmarks? I'm going to refresh. Go to the bean. Ooh, look at that. But it's at 208. I don't know where that's at. Oh, that's at the, or that's where we're currently located at. So, but now let's look at the Google Maps stuff. So create API ID, click close. The new API key is listed, which we got. Add the API key to your request. We already did that, which is right. Should do that there. Which is right there. But what else do we need?
How do we, what's the format for?
Yeah. All right, cool. Developer guide. Look here. Your API key. I'm just reading documentation at this. Okay, introduction. The map's embedded. It lets you place. So here for this iframe, it looks like we're at the Space Needle. It's not using latitude and longitude. It's actually utilizing the actual address. Cool. Sweet. So let's actually use this one instead. Because we can actually extract our address. So I'm just copying my key over down to the Space Needle. And then I'm replacing it with this. So it looks like here is where we'll want our address to go. We actually have the address right here, landmark address, right? But
It's not formatted with pluses.
Right.
Spaces.
So right now, as Ethan just said, our address isn't formatted. It's like space plus needle, comma, Seattle plus Washington. So we'll need to actually generate an address right here and replace our, like the address that we have in our database with pluses or spaces or something like that. So once we're back here, we have our landmark detail. We have our landmark. Now let's write another method to get a modified address that has all like the plus signs in it. So generate Google address. That will take in an address from our database. And then modified address. Now, how do I replace, say, all the spaces in our database or in our address with pluses or something? You can just use replace. Like that. Does that work?
Is this the best place to do this, or would you catch this as a restriction for your database?
No, we don't want to save it in our database with all the pluses or anything like that. We want to have it just as a normal string, and because we might want to.
Because we do, we print out.
Yeah, we print out the address right here.
Okay, understood.
So yes, we would want to do this like within a view in its own method. And instead of putting this whole thing right here, can we put this somewhere else? Like instead of using the API key, embed it right here.
Yeah, you can put that in the address function.
All right, let's.
The
Yeah.
address, and there's the whole URL, and you pass in the URL.
So I'm going to put this URL right down here. It looks like here is where we want to pass in the modified address. And then maybe, I think that's it, right? So to return, I'm interpolating that, something like that.
You have 2 quotes at the end.
Oh.
And also, since you're doing it just in Python, you only need 1 set of curly braces.
Thank you. Like that. So that's a.
And you have a line feed. Because tab in.
There we go. So we're here, we're generating a Google address. We're having a modified address. Now what else can we do? So this is where we're actually rendering the landmark detail. Can we put like the URL equals generate Google address, then landmark dot address maybe, right? We got the landmark right here. We're passing in, we're calling this method. Let's print this. Should I refresh this? URL. So I refreshed this, it came here, landmark request by the landmark ID. It's getting the landmark from the database. We're assigning this variable called URL, which is calling this generate Google address. We're passing in the landmark address down here. Then it's taking the address and it's replacing all the spaces with pluses. Then it's returning a string interpolation of the Google address with the API key right here, right there. And then it's passing in the modified address that has all the pluses. So it's like, let's just print the modified address as well. I like printing stuff a lot. See what the hell's going on. Address. That's not right. So I'm going to just refresh this. I know it's probably not going to work yet. So we have the modified address down here. 2 Randolph Street, Chicago, Illinois. And we also have the URL. That looks good. So now we also have to pass in some data to the landmark of the URL. So we can also do comma URL. URL. Does that make sense? Passing in a dictionary with a landmark, as well as another key value pair of the URL. If I go back here, so I've got the landmark name, landmark address, it would just be URL. Like that?
Yep.
If I refresh this, will it work? Oh, look at that. It worked. Now if I go back, we got the Eiffel Tower, click on it. Got the Eiffel Tower shows up. Click on this, the Golden Gate Bridge shows up as well. So let's recap what we did. We created a simple CRUD app up to landmark list and landmark detail. And now we're incorporating an API. So we created an API using Google Maps, which is all in your lecture. It's pretty straightforward. Quick start guide, come down here, developer guide. To get an API key, it says get an API key. You follow these steps. You have to create a project up here. Embed API. You're going to have to enable this. It'll say enable. If you've never used it before, you'll enable it, and then you'll be coming here to like a dashboard type of thing, and then you have to go to credentials. So if I do it as a home, yeah. So you'll probably be here in your project. Here's like all the requests that we've done so far. Go into menu navigation, APIs and services, credentials. Then you have to create a credential, create an API key, and that's how you create an API key. So up to that point, that's how we got our API key. And based off of how Google wants to receive that information, that request to generate the Google map, it's got the API key here, and then plus an address. So we had to actually generate the type of the source, the URL for the API key, which we did in the generate Google address, which passed in an address from the landmark. And we modified the landmark address to include pluses. It needs to be in that format to interact with the Google API.
Is this also a way to mask information by interpolating variables in the HTML from the view from the controller?
You can do it from the view. You can do it from. I didn't have to put the entire URL in here, but it's good to.
Now people don't know what necessarily.
I think you still might be able to.
If you use a source, it's going to have that full URL.
Yeah.
Is it?
So let's look at it. Elements, body, div class, there. So you can actually see the API key right here, which is fine because it's a public API key. It's not private. I created a Google Maps URL and input the modified address. And it was assigned to this variable up here in landmark detail. And then I passed in, I'm actually going to change this part. So it should be like data equals landmark essentially it's this thing. Like that, and then I'm going to pass in data right here. So because it has to pass in a dictionary. So I created a dictionary that has the landmark as well as the URL because I need both that data.
Yeah.
On the front end. So I'm rendering this landmark detail HTML, landmark name, landmark address, and I'm grabbing the URL from the dictionary. I'm passing it from the data. I'm passing it. What questions do you have?
For ease of use, would you ever set your key to a variable, like a laser edit, and move around and use?
Yes. So if no one has any questions, go ahead and go through the lecture, but this time, think about how you would want to mask that key. So we're currently, the Google API key is public. It's kind of okay that it's where it is in the right here. It's like already right here. It's okay, but for best practices, it's good to hide that in some respects. So maybe hide it in Django settings. So if we look in our Django settings, we'll see where is it? Is it up here? There's like some kind of,
validations.
it's like secret key. So you might want us to say like Google Maps API, put it somewhere in here, maybe. Or you might want to put it on the actual server. Think about like, these are just things to think about. And then how would you pass in that variable from the settings into your view?
You'd have to import settings.
Something like that. I would just, so just think about that, how you'd hide it. And then also implement update and delete in this tutorial. But yeah, I already kind of did some of it for you. I guess we already did it in here, never mind. But then the next, once you do this, go through this tutorial first, just get a lay of the land of how to create an API key and using Google Maps API. And then for the challenge, it's going to take you probably a couple of days to do, because you're not just using Google Maps API, you're going to be using Ticketmaster's API. So in this challenge, which I recommend you guys pair program with, you're going to create a Google Maps or a Ticketmaster that will take in an input of an artist. You're going to click like Lady Gaga. You're going to click submit. You don't necessarily need a database for this. It can all be done on the through the requests. So you don't actually have to store anything in the database. So you're going to click like Lady Gaga, click submit. It's going to send an API request to Ticketmaster. It's going to get a list of events sent back to you of the list of events for Lady Gaga. And then you're going to grab the location of those events. That location will be in the response from that Ticketmaster API. Then you're going to have to grab the location, change the data a little bit, manipulate it maybe a little bit, then pass it in to Google Maps and render a Google Maps of the five most recent events for that artist. Yeah. Now, like I said, Google is really good at documentation. It's pretty clear, step by step. Ticketmaster's isn't as clear, but let's just look at it. So you may have to create an account. I heard you don't, but you might have to. Let's say like getting started, start here, use cases. There's all these weird kind of stuff. Discovery. Yeah, it's kind of like just you gotta kind of read some stuff. Where is it? Discovery API, authentication. So I would look at examples under overview. So under Discovery API overview, get a list of all events for Adele in Canada. It's going to look like something like this, but you don't necessarily want Canada. You might be able to delete like the country code, the attraction ID, or something like that. So, oh no, right here, this one. Search for an event sourced by universe in the United States with keyword DevJam. So I would look at this one, see what that one looks like. So it's got an API key. You don't necessarily need source universe. You don't necessarily need country code. You might be able to delete that and just use keyword. So when you're inputting in your form, you can, instead of DevJam, you can put in like Lady space Gaga. And it can come into here and it'll return some stuff. So I would look at this one, this example. Any questions? Remote, do you have any questions? And I would also looking at the requests, plural, requests package, Python package.
Oh,
You might have to import some package called requests. See how that works.
is that because we're dealing with multiple?
No, I think it used to be included in Django, but I think now we have to import it. I would just look at that. It's how we're making requests and stuff. But first, go through the Google Maps, the lecture for today.
Let's do that
There
first.
you go.
Sounds free.
Breakfast burrito.